I'm Amanda Wilson, 34, and until last month I was the backbone of my parents' construction company that I helped build for 12 years. While my older sister Vanessa was always the golden child who could do no wrong, I was the one showing up every day, securing contracts, and managing crews. When my parents retired, they handed the company to her despite her zero experience. One day after taking over, she called me into her office and coldly fired me with no explanation. "Your services are no longer needed," she said with a smirk. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on my sister who thought she could throw me away like yesterday's trash, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by family. Growing up in the Wilson family meant learning early on about the hierarchy that existed between my siblings and me. My parents, Robert and Elizabeth Wilson, built their construction company from nothing in a small Connecticut town. Dad started, with just a pickup truck and a toolbox, while Mom handled the books from our kitchen table. Through sheer determination and countless sacrifices, they transformed Wilson Construction into a respectable regional company by the time I was in elementary school. Our family consisted of 5 people: my parents, my older sister Vanessa, who was 2 years my senior, me in the middle, and our younger brother Tyler, who was 5 years younger than me. From my earliest memories, it was clear that Vanessa was the favorite child. She was beautiful, charismatic, and seemed to excel effortlessly at everything she touched. When Vanessa brought home straight A's, my parents would take the entire family out for a celebration dinner. When I achieved the same feat the following year, I received a casual good job over breakfast. In 4th grade, Vanessa won the school spelling bee, and my parents framed the certificate and hung it in our living room where it remained for years. When I won the state science fair in 7th grade, my project sat on the dining room table for a week before being moved to the basement. These patterns continued throughout our childhood, subtle but persistent reminders that Vanessa simply mattered more. While Vanessa focused on academics, student government, and being homecoming queen, I developed a genuine interest in our family business. By age 13, I was spending summers at construction sites, learning from foremen and workers about the practical aspects of building. My father seemed surprised by my interest but allowed me to tag along. "Just stay out of the way," he'd say, not recognizing how intently I was observing everything. During high school, Vanessa applied to Ivy League colleges with our parents' enthusiastic support. Meanwhile, I researched programs in construction management and business, paying for application fees from my part-time job since my parents were too busy helping Vanessa with her more prestigious applications. When Vanessa was accepted to Harvard, our house practically transformed into a shrine to her achievement. Banners, parties, and non-stop phone calls to relatives spread the news. When I received a scholarship to a well-respected state university for construction management, my mother said, "That's nice, dear," before returning to addressing Vanessa's Harvard acceptance announcements. College years widened the gap further. While Vanessa enjoyed the full college experience with generous financial support from our parents, I worked 20 hours weekly at a local construction company while maintaining a 3.9 GPA. During breaks, I worked directly at Wilson Construction, learning accounting systems, supplier management, and project planning. My parents rarely acknowledged these efforts, seeming to view them as merely expected rather than impressive. Meanwhile, Vanessa's occasional internships at prestigious firms, arranged through our parents' connections, were celebrated as genius career moves. Despite all this, I never lost my passion for construction and business. I genuinely loved seeing projects progress from blueprints to finished buildings. There was something deeply satisfying about creating structures that would stand for decades. This passion fueled my persistence despite the lack of recognition. Over time, I also began noticing concerning aspects of Vanessa's character that my parents seemed willfully blind to. The casual lies about where she was spending her time, the manipulative ways she'd pit people against each other for her benefit, the constant expectation that others would clean up her messes, literal and figurative. During my senior year of college, I received job offers from two major construction firms. The positions offered better salaries and benefits than I could expect at our family company. For a brief moment, I considered taking one of them, starting fresh where I wouldn't constantly live in Vanessa's shadow. But ultimately, I declined both offers. Despite everything, Wilson Construction was in my blood. I believed I could help take the company to new heights, and perhaps finally earn the recognition I'd always worked for. The decision sealed my fate. For the next 12 years, though I couldn't have imagined how dramatically it would all unravel and transform. My first day as a full-time employee at Wilson Construction began without fanfare. Mom handed me an employee handbook that was severely outdated, and Dad pointed me toward a cubicle next to the supply closet. "Start by organizing these invoices," he said, dropping a disorganized pile of papers on my desk. That stack of invoices became a metaphor for my early years at the company, sorting through messes, creating systems, and bringing order to chaos without recognition. Within 6 months, I had completely overhauled the company's invoicing system, saving thousands in accounting hours and reducing payment delays by 60%. My father's only comment was, "Good, now maybe we can focus on actual construction." I didn't let his dismissive attitude discourage me. I created a 5-year strategic plan for company growth and presented it during a staff meeting. Several colleagues nodded appreciatively, but my father interrupted halfway through. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves with fancy charts. We've done fine with our approach for 20 years. Rather than arguing, I implemented my plan piece by piece without labeling it as such. I took on increasingly complex responsibilities, moving from administration to project management within 2 years. I worked 60-hour weeks, arriving before everyone and leaving after even my father had gone home. During this time, I formed crucial relationships with people who would later become allies in my darkest moments. Michael Jenkins was a foreman who'd been with the company since before I was born. Gruff but fair, he initially seemed skeptical of the boss's daughter, but grew to respect my work ethic and knowledge. "You actually give a damn about doing things right," he told me after I spent an entire Saturday helping his crew fix an issue caused by a supplier's mistake. Diana Chen joined as our accountant in my 3rd year. Sharp-minded and detail-oriented, she appreciated my systematic approach and frequently collaborated with me on financial improvements. Carlos Rodriguez, a talented project manager we hired, away from a competitor, became another trusted colleague. His innovative approaches complemented my strategic thinking, and together we modernized many of the company's operations. As my influence grew, so did the company's success. I introduced software that streamlined project management and improved client communications. I developed relationships with new suppliers that reduced material costs by 15%. I created a more rigorous hiring process that reduced turnover and improved quality. The most significant breakthrough came in my 5th year when I secured a contract with Meridian Properties, a major developer previously uninterested in working with mid-size contractors like us. After months of persistent networking and a detailed proposal that addressed their specific concerns, they awarded us a multi-million-dollar project. The success of that project led to 2 more contracts with them, establishing a relationship that transformed our company's profile and profitability. Through all these achievements, my parents remained reluctantly impressed at best. "Not bad," my father said after the first Meridian project completed ahead of schedule and under budget. My mother occasionally mentioned my contributions during family dinners, but always in passing, never with the enthusiasm that accompanied any news about Vanessa. Speaking of Vanessa, her appearances at the company during these years were rare, but always dramatic. After completing her MBA, she cycled through several high-profile jobs at financial firms and tech companies, never staying longer than 18 months at any position. When she visited the office, she'd sweep in wearing designer clothes, kiss everyone on the cheek, and make vague comments about the family business. During company events, she'd somehow position herself front and center in photographs, despite having contributed nothing to the projects being celebrated. What bothered me most was how she'd casually take credit for ideas or initiatives that had been my work entirely. "Oh yes, I suggested something like that to Dad years ago," she'd say when someone complimented a new process I'd implemented. Or, "That's actually based on a case study from my business school regarding a solution I'd developed through trial and error on the job." My resentment grew, but so did my dedication to the company. By my 10th year, Wilson Construction had tripled its annual revenue, expanded to 35 full-time employees plus dozens of regular contractors, and established a reputation for excellence throughout the Northeast. We had moved to larger offices twice to accommodate our growth, and our project portfolio included everything from luxury residential developments to municipal buildings. My role had evolved to unofficially running most day-to-day operations, while my father maintained final approval on major decisions and my mother managed client relationships. They had begun discussing retirement, floating the idea during family dinners but never making concrete plans. Then suddenly, Vanessa began showing unusual interest in the company. After years of barely acknowledging its existence except to drop my achievements into her cocktail party conversations, she started calling my parents daily about business matters. She arranged lunches with my father to learn more about his vision. She even showed up at job sites, something she'd never done before, taking photos and asking superficial questions of confused foremen. I sensed something shifting, but I was too busy managing our largest project to date, a sustainable office complex that would showcase our capabilities to a whole new tier of potential clients. I should have paid more attention to the warning signs that were flashing all around me. The announcement came during a family dinner at my parents' house on a Sunday evening in early autumn. Mom had prepared her special pot roast, Dad had opened an expensive bottle of wine, and even Tyler had flown in from Chicago where he worked as an architect. The mood seemed celebratory, though no one had mentioned an occasion. Between the main course and dessert, my father clinked his glass and stood up. "Your mother and I have made an important decision," he began, smiling at all of us but lingering on Vanessa. "After 35 wonderful years, we've decided it's time to retire from active management of Wilson Construction." This wasn't entirely surprising. They were both in their mid-60s and had been hinting at retirement for years. What came next, however, hit me like a physical blow. "We're pleased to announce that Vanessa will be taking over as CEO, effective next month." The room seemed to spin around me as my father continued outlining their decision. Vanessa beamed while my mother nodded enthusiastically beside her. Tyler looked confused, glancing between Vanessa and me with furrowed brows. I somehow maintained my composure, forcing my face into a neutral expression while my stomach churned with disbelief. When my father finished speaking, Vanessa stood and gave a practiced speech about honoring their legacy and leading the company into a new era. She hadn't worked a single day in construction. She couldn't tell a joist from a girder. She had never managed a project, negotiated with suppliers, or faced down angry clients when complications arose. Yet here she was, accepting the position I had effectively been doing for years, while actually learning the business from the ground up. When everyone looked at me expectantly, I offered congratulations that sounded hollow even to my own ears. After dessert, which I couldn't taste, I asked my parents to speak privately. In my father's study, I finally let my true feelings show. "Dad, Mom, how could you make this decision? I've dedicated my entire career to Wilson Construction. I know every aspect of the business, every client, every supplier. Vanessa has zero experience in our industry." My mother patted my hand condescendingly. "Darling, Vanessa has an MBA from Harvard. She has the formal education needed to lead a growing company." My father nodded in agreement. "Besides, Amanda, you'll still have your position. Vanessa will need your knowledge during the transition." "My position?" I repeated, incredulous. "Dad, I've been effectively running this company for years while you've been semi-retired already. Everyone knows it, including our major clients." A flash of acknowledgement crossed his face before he dismissed it. "That's an exaggeration. Yes, you've taken on more responsibility, but the important decisions have always been mine." This was blatantly untrue. For the past 3 years, he'd rubber-stamped my decisions while spending half the year at their vacation home in Florida. My mother interjected with what she clearly thought was the real explanation. "Amanda, the truth is that Vanessa needs this opportunity. Her last position didn't end well, and this is a chance for her to really establish herself with a successful company." And there it was, the pattern of our entire lives. Vanessa's needs always came first, regardless of merit, effort, or fairness. I spent that night oscillating between rage and despair, seriously contemplating quitting immediately. I updated my resume and browsed job listings until dawn, imagining the satisfaction of walking away from the family that had never valued my contributions. But when morning came, I thought about the employees whose livelihoods depended on the company's success. People like Michael, who had a son in college; Diana, who had just bought her first home based on the security of her position; Carlos, who had turned down offers from larger firms to stay with us. I couldn't abandon them to Vanessa's inexperienced leadership, so I made the decision to stay and ensure a smooth transition, at least until I could make alternative arrangements for my future. The following 4 weeks were excruciating. I created detailed documentation of all ongoing projects, client relationships, and operational procedures. I arranged meetings between Vanessa and key clients, suppliers, and employees. I developed a comprehensive transition plan that would have been appropriate for an experienced executive, though I doubted Vanessa would follow it. Throughout this process, Vanessa's behavior reinforced my concerns. During transition meetings, she scrolled through her phone while I explained critical information about cash flow management. She rescheduled important client introductions at the last minute for trivial personal matters. She dismissed decades of industry wisdom with comments like, "That's the old way of thinking. Business is business. The specifics of construction don't really matter." Most alarmingly, she began having closed-door meetings with people from Brighton Developments, our largest competitor, claiming they were just friends from business school. I didn't trust her explanations but had no authority to question her further. The night before the official transition, I stayed late at the office, backing up important documents and making copies of contacts and project information. It felt paranoid, but something in my gut told me to prepare for the worst. I also took a moment to write personal emails to several key clients, assuring them of my commitment to their projects and providing my personal contact information in case they ever needed anything. I had no idea how prescient this action would prove to be, or how soon those contacts would become vital. The morning of Vanessa's first day as CEO began with a company-wide meeting in our largest conference room. Every employee packed in, curiosity and uncertainty evident on their faces. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes late, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed more appropriate for a Wall Street firm than a construction company. She took the position at the head of the table that had been my father's, and unofficially mine for the past few years. "Thank you all for coming," she began with a practiced smile. "Today marks the beginning of an exciting new chapter for Wilson Construction. I know many of you have been here for years, even decades, and I want to assure you that I respect the foundation that's been built." She paused for effect. "But respect for the past doesn't mean we can't evolve. My vision for Wilson Construction involves significant modernization, strategic pivoting, and aggressive growth through new partnerships." For the next 40 minutes, she outlined plans that sounded impressive, but revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of our business. She spoke about synergistic opportunities and vertical integration, using MBA jargon while proposing ideas that anyone with real construction experience would recognize as impractical or risky. Throughout her presentation, she occasionally glanced at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Not once did she acknowledge my role in the company's current success or the transition process. After the meeting, Several employees approached me with concerned expressions, but I maintained a professional demeanor, assuring them that change always requires adjustment. The morning proceeded with scheduled meetings and routine tasks. Vanessa remained in her new office, previously my father's, with the door closed. At 1:38 p.m., I received an email from her assistant, a new hire I'd never met before, requesting my presence in the CEO's office at 2:00 p.m. sharp. When I arrived, Vanessa was seated behind the massive oak desk, a leather portfolio open before her. She didn't invite me to sit. "Amanda, I'll get straight to the point because I respect your time," she began, though her tone conveyed no respect whatsoever. "I've spent the transition period evaluating our organizational structure and needs moving forward. After careful consideration, I've determined that your position is redundant in the new leadership paradigm I'm implementing." I stood perfectly, still processing her words. "Redundant?" I repeated. "I'm the most knowledgeable person in this company about every project, client relationship, and operational system." Vanessa smiled thinly. "Yes, and you've documented all that beautifully during the transition. Thank you for that. But moving forward, we need fresh perspectives, not someone tied to outdated methodologies." She slid a folder across the desk. "Here's your severance package. 2 months' salary and benefits, which is generous considering the circumstances." "What circumstances?" I asked, not touching the folder. She sighed as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "Amanda, let's be adults here. We both know you don't support my vision for the company. Your presence would undermine my leadership and create unnecessary friction. Your services are no longer needed, effective immediately." The casualness with which she dismissed 12 years of my life, thousands of hours of overtime, countless sacrifices, all while sitting in an office I had effectively occupied for years, struck me with such force that I physically stepped back. "Does Mom and Dad know about this decision?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Something flickered across her face. Satisfaction, perhaps? "They've entrusted the company to my leadership, which includes staffing decisions. Security will escort you to your desk to collect personal items, and HR has prepared the necessary paperwork." Within 15 minutes, I found myself walking through the office I had helped build, past shocked colleagues, with a security guard trailing behind me like I was a criminal. Diana stood in the doorway of the accounting department, hand covering her mouth. Michael emerged from a meeting room, his weathered face darkening with anger as he assessed the situation. Carlos stepped forward as if to intervene, but I subtly shook my head. This wasn't the time or place. I collected the few truly personal items from my desk: a photo of our team after completing the Meridian project, a paperweight Tyler had given me, a spare pair of work boots, and placed them in a cardboard box. My professional materials and files remained untouched. They were company property. As I walked to the elevator, employees stopped what they were doing to watch. Some looked confused, others angry, a few seemed afraid. I maintained a dignified expression, refusing to give Vanessa the satisfaction of seeing me break down. The security guard, Jake, who'd actually been hired based on my recommendation 2 years prior, mumbled an apology as we reached my car. "This isn't right, Ms. Wilson. Everyone knows what you've done for this company." I thanked him quietly and placed the box in my trunk. As I drove away from the building I had helped design and finance, the emotions I had suppressed began to surface. Tears blurred my vision, forcing me to pull over in a shopping center parking lot a mile from the office. My phone buzzed continuously with text messages from colleagues, expressions of shock, outrage, support, and questions about what had happened. I couldn't bring myself to respond yet. The drive home became a blur of tears and disbelief. I parked in my driveway and sat motionless, staring at nothing, reliving the humiliation and betrayal. Eventually, I made my way inside and collapsed on my couch, the emotional dam breaking completely. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes burned. For the years of unrecognized work, for the betrayal by my own sister, for the blindness of my parents who had never seen my value. When the tears finally subsided, I found myself staring at the ceiling of my living room as the afternoon light faded to evening. Something shifted within me during those quiet hours alone. The devastation gradually transformed into cold, clear determination. Vanessa had made a catastrophic mistake, one born of arrogance and ignorance. She thought she had won by taking the company and discarding me. She believed that with my departure, she had secured her position and eliminated any obstacle to her plans, but she had overlooked something crucial. No one knew Wilson Construction, its strengths, weaknesses, relationships, and inner workings better than I did. And I had just been freed from any obligation to protect a company that had so callously discarded me. That night, as I showered away the tears and ordered takeout I couldn't taste, a plan began forming in my mind. "This isn't over," I whispered to my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Not by a long shot. The week following my termination passed in a calculated blur of activity. I allowed myself exactly 1 day to process the emotional aftermath, 24 hours to feel the hurt, betrayal, and anger. Then I packed those feelings away and approached my situation like the most important project I'd ever managed. First, I transformed my home office into a command center. I installed a large whiteboard on one wall where I mapped out the company structure, ongoing projects, and key relationships. On another wall, I created a timeline of actions and targets. My dining table disappeared beneath stacks of notes, contracts, and industry publications. The severance agreement Vanessa had offered remained unsigned on my kitchen counter. My initial strategic advantage came from an unexpected source: Wilson Construction's bylaws and operating agreement. 3 years earlier, when we'd restructured, due to growth, I had worked closely with our corporate attorney to update these documents. My father had signed them without reading the details, trusting my summary. What Vanessa didn't know was that those documents contained specific protections I had included, based on a scenario I'd feared even then, that someday my contributions might be devalued or dismissed. One particular clause restricted the sale of company assets or shares to non-family members without unanimous board approval for the first 2 years after a leadership change. Since the board consisted of my parents, Vanessa, and technically still me, as my termination as an employee didn't automatically remove me from the board, this gave me significant leverage. On day 3, I received a call from Diana, who spoke in hushed tones from her car in the company parking lot. "Amanda, things are chaotic here. Vanessa called an executive meeting yesterday and announced a strategic partnership with Brighton Developments. She's talking about selling them our equipment division and the Richardson property." This confirmed my suspicions. Brighton had wanted to acquire Wilson for years but had been rebuffed by my father. Vanessa wasn't planning to run the company. She was dismantling it for quick profit. Diana continued providing information. Vanessa had already alienated 2 major clients with her dismissive attitude. She had questioned the necessity of safety protocols that exceeded minimum requirements, protocols I had implemented that had given us a competitive advantage in securing municipal contracts. She had also brought in consultants who knew nothing about construction to optimize operations. My next move involved a discreet lunch with my parents' longtime attorney, James Harrington. Though technically the company's lawyer, James had known me since childhood and had always treated me with respect. What Vanessa did was legally questionable, he confirmed after hearing my story. Terminating a key officer without board approval potentially violates company bylaws, and if she's planning asset sales as you suspect, she's on very thin ice. Legally. James also helped me understand another crucial piece of information. My parents had transferred ownership stakes to both Vanessa and me years ago for tax purposes, 15% each, while they retained 70% collectively. This meant I was not just a board member but a minority owner with specific rights. Through careful networking, I learned something else vital. Vanessa was drowning in debt. Her seemingly glamorous life in Manhattan had been financed largely through credit cards and personal loans. Her previous job hadn't ended voluntarily. She'd been terminated for ethical violations involving expense accounts. Taking control of Wilson Construction wasn't about family legacy. It was a financial lifeline she desperately needed. Meanwhile, I methodically reached out to key clients with whom I'd built strong relationships over years. To maintain professionalism, I never disparaged Vanessa or the company. Instead, I simply expressed gratitude for our past work together and made myself available if they ever needed consultation on construction matters. Almost universally, they responded with concerns about recent interactions with the new leadership at Wilson. My most important strategic meeting happened 10 days after my firing. Michael, Diana, and Carlos met me at a restaurant 30 miles from our office to avoid being seen. They brought disturbing news. Vanessa had already signed a letter of intent with Brighton to sell our equipment division at well below market value. She had terminated 2 project managers with decades of experience to reduce overhead. Most alarmingly, she had begun approaching our clients about contract modifications that substantially favored Wilson at the expense of project quality. "The company will collapse within months if this continues," Carlos said gravely. "The reputation we've built over years is eroding daily." Diana slid a flash drive across the table. "These are copies of the Brighton negotiations and financial projections she's not sharing with the board. I could lose my job for this, but what she's doing isn't just wrong, it's possibly illegal." I thanked them for taking such risks. "I have a plan," I assured them, "but I need your eyes and ears inside for a little longer." That night, I reviewed the documents Diana had provided. They confirmed my worst fears and strengthened my resolve. The flash drive also contained emails between Vanessa and Brighton executives that clearly indicated they had been planning this takeover since before my parents' retirement announcement. With my strategy crystallizing, I established a small consulting LLC to maintain my industry credentials and provide a legitimate business front for my activities. I leased a modest office space and created a website highlighting my experience without directly mentioning Wilson Construction. This would serve as both my backup plan for future employment and a platform from which to execute my counter-strategy. By the end of 2 weeks, my home office walls were covered with information, connections, and plans. I had identified every vulnerability in Vanessa's position. I understood exactly what she wanted and why. I knew which regulations she was likely violating and which contractual obligations she was ignoring. Most importantly, I had documented evidence of her true intentions for the company my parents had built and I had helped grow. As I reviewed my comprehensive plan that Friday evening, I felt a calm confidence replace the hurt and anger that had initially driven me. Vanessa had fired me thinking she was eliminating an obstacle. Instead, she had freed me to become her most dangerous adversary, one with nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. I launched my counteroffensive exactly 18 days after my termination, beginning with a strategic meeting at Westbrook Country Club with the representatives of our 3 largest ongoing projects, Riverfront Plaza, Oakwood Commons, and the Thompson Municipal Center. These projects collectively represented over 60% of Wilson Construction's current portfolio and cash flow. I had arranged the meeting through personal connections, positioning it as an informal consultation about construction industry trends. Roger Billings from Riverfront, Teresa Nguyen from Oakwood, and Mayor Jim Thompson himself all attended, curious about my sudden departure from Wilson. "I appreciate you all coming," I began after we'd ordered lunch. "I value our professional relationships and wanted to touch base personally after my transition away from Wilson Construction." I deliberately kept my language neutral and professional. Teresa was the first to broach the subject directly. "Amanda, we were shocked to hear about your departure. The project manager Vanessa assigned to our development barely understands our timeline requirements or the specific challenges of our site." Mayor Thompson nodded in agreement. "We've had similar issues. The new team missed a critical zoning Meeting last week and submitted documentation with significant errors that could have jeopardized our permits. I listened attentively, asked clarifying questions, and offered limited advice without overstepping ethical boundaries. I never suggested they take any specific action regarding their contracts with Wilson. I didn't need to. By the end of lunch, all three had independently mentioned their contractual right to review project leadership changes and express concerns about project viability. 2 days later, Wilson Construction received formal letters from all three clients, placing their projects on temporary hold pending review of management changes and their impact on project delivery capabilities. The impact was immediate and severe. These holds froze over $12 million in scheduled payments and created a cash flow crisis that Vanessa was completely unprepared to handle. My phone rang at 7:14 that evening, Vanessa's name flashing on the screen. I watched it ring until voicemail picked up. She called 4 more times in succession, then sent a text. "This is unprofessional and petty. Call me immediately." I didn't respond. The following day, I executed the second phase of my plan, a meeting with First Regional Bank, which held the company's operating line of credit and financed most of our major projects. Franklin Pearson, the loan officer who had worked with Wilson Construction for over a decade, welcomed me warmly. "Amanda, we've been concerned about the leadership change. Your father always said you were the one who really understood the financial side of the business." Our conversation focused on industry trends and general concerns about construction financing. I carefully avoided making any direct accusations about Wilson's current management. However, when Franklin asked about my departure, I truthfully explained that it had been sudden and involuntary, and that I had significant concerns about the company's current direction. "That's troubling to hear," Franklin said, making notes. "We've already noticed some irregularities in recent financial submissions and project status reports." I simply nodded, letting the implications hang in the air. Within 48 hours, First Regional Bank announced a comprehensive review of all outstanding loans to Wilson Construction, effectively freezing access to several $1 million in credit facilities. The third blow came from an unexpected quarter. Several key suppliers with whom I had built strong relationships over years of fair dealings and prompt payments began requiring upfront payment from Wilson rather than extending the usual net 30 terms. This created yet another cash flow problem for Vanessa, who now faced the impossible task of making payroll while major income sources were frozen and suppliers demanded immediate payment. Through my network of loyal contacts, I learned that operations at Wilson were quickly descending into chaos. 2 project sites had temporarily shut down due to supply issues. Employees were openly questioning Vanessa's decisions. Brighton Developments had mysteriously become less interested in the equipment division purchase, likely sensing the company's growing instability. On day 7 of my counteroffensive, I received the call I had been expecting. My father's name appeared on my phone screen late in the evening. I took a deep breath and answered. "Amanda, what the hell is going on?" His voice carried a mixture of anger and panic. "We're getting calls about project holds, credit reviews, and supply problems. Vanessa says you're behind this somehow." I remained calm. "Dad, I haven't done anything improper. I've simply maintained my professional relationships as anyone would after leaving a position." "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "You know exactly what you're doing." "Do I, Dad? Maybe we should discuss what Vanessa did first. Did she tell you she fired me the day after taking over, with no warning and no cause? Did she mention the security escort out of the building? Or the insultingly inadequate severance offer?" His momentary silence told me she had not shared these details. "She said you two agreed to part ways due to strategic differences," he finally said, his voice less certain. "That's a creative interpretation," I replied coolly. "There was no agreement or discussion. She called me redundant and had me escorted out like a criminal after 12 years of building your company." "Our company," he corrected automatically. "The company you gave to Vanessa despite her having zero experience or knowledge of the industry," I countered. The company I've effectively been running for years while you enjoyed semi-retirement in Florida. My mother's voice suddenly came on the line. They were on speakerphone. Amanda, surely you're exaggerating. Vanessa would never… I cut her off, my patience finally wearing thin. Check your email, both of you. I've just sent you copies of the termination notice, the security escort request, and the severance offer. Also included are emails between Vanessa and Brighton Developments discussing the sale of company assets at below market rates, discussions that began months before your retirement announcement. The prolonged silence that followed suggested they were reviewing the documents. Finally, my father spoke, his voice notably subdued. We didn't know, Amanda. Vanessa told us you had agreed to stay on in a reduced capacity but then changed your mind. And you believed that without even calling to ask me? The hurt I'd suppressed for weeks crept into my voice. After everything I've contributed to, Wilson Construction, you didn't think it was worth a single phone call to hear my side? More silence. Then my mother, sounding shaken. What do you want, Amanda? It was the first time in my adult life they had ever asked me that question, and actually seemed to care about the answer. I'm not coming back as an employee, I stated firmly. Not after how I was treated. If you want to salvage what's left of the company, we need to meet as board members and shareholders to discuss Vanessa's actions and their consequences. Bring your attorney. I ended the call before they could respond, my heart racing but my resolve stronger than ever. The initial phase of my plan had succeeded beyond expectations. In just 1 week, I had created enough pressure to force my parents to confront the truth about their golden child. But this was just the beginning. The real battle for Wilson Construction's future was about to begin, and I was fully prepared for war. 3 weeks after my termination, Wilson Construction stood on the precipice of collapse. Projects remained stalled, credit lines frozen, suppliers demanding cash on delivery, and employees jumping ship at an alarming rate. The emergency board meeting I had demanded was scheduled for Thursday morning at the company headquarters. As both a board member and 15% shareholder, my right to attend couldn't be denied, despite Vanessa's attempts to exclude me. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a crisp navy suit that projected confidence and authority. The receptionist, Marla, who had worked with us for over a decade, greeted me with a warm hug. Everyone's talking about today, she whispered. The whole office knows something big is happening. The conference room gradually filled with somber faces. My parents entered together looking tired and conflicted. James Harrington, their attorney, nodded respectfully toward me. Diana arrived with financial reports tucked under her arm, avoiding Vanessa's glare. 2 representatives from First Regional Bank took seats near the door. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Vanessa swept in last, 10 minutes late, flanked by a young attorney I didn't recognize. She wore an expensive suit and forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She performed a double take upon seeing me, quickly masking her surprise with a dismissive glance. My father called the meeting to order with a gravity I hadn't seen from him in years. We're here to address serious concerns about the company's current situation and leadership decisions, he began. In the 3 weeks since the management transition, Wilson Construction has experienced unprecedented client relationship issues, financial restrictions, and operational challenges. Vanessa immediately leapt to her defense. These are temporary adjustments during a standard leadership transition, she insisted, her voice artificially confident. Every company experiences growing pains during strategic pivoting. I've been implementing necessary modernizations to an outdated operational model. I remained silent, allowing her to continue digging her hole deeper. For the next 20 minutes, Vanessa presented a series of increasingly implausible explanations for the company's situation. She blamed market conditions despite the construction industry being at a 5-year high. She suggested a conspiracy among suppliers without acknowledging her failure to maintain relationships. She even implied that my sabotage was responsible, though she carefully avoided making direct accusations with attorneys present. When she finished, Diana presented the financial reality. Wilson Construction had lost nearly 30% of its projected annual revenue in just 3 weeks. Cash reserves were dangerously low. Without immediate intervention, making next month's payroll would be impossible. The bank representatives confirmed that the credit review had raised significant concerns about current management practices and financial projections. They outlined strict conditions for reinstating normal credit operations, including management adjustments. Throughout these presentations, my parents' expressions shifted from confusion to shock to grim understanding. When my turn finally came to speak, I was measured and factual. The current crisis isn't the result of market conditions or growing pains, I began, opening a folder of meticulously organized documents. It stems directly from 3 critical failures in leadership. I outlined each failure with supporting evidence. First, the alienation of key clients through dismissive communication and failure to understand project complexities. Second, the mishandling of financial obligations and supplier relationships built over decades. Third, and most damning, the secret negotiations with Brighton Developments to sell company assets without board approval, in direct violation of the company bylaws. As I distributed copies of emails between Vanessa and Brighton executives, the PT room fell silent. These documents clearly showed their plan to strip the valuable assets and real estate holdings from Wilson Construction before restructuring the remaining operation. My father's face darkened as he read. My mother pressed her hand to her mouth. Vanessa's attorney whispered urgently in her ear. Vanessa suddenly stood, her composure cracking. "This is absurd. Those emails are taken out of context. I was exploring strategic partnerships to strengthen our position in a competitive market. Is that why the draft agreement gives Brighton acquisition rights to the equipment division at 40% below market valuation?" I asked calmly. "Is that why you've been liquidating company assets without board notification? You're just bitter because you couldn't handle not being in charge anymore," Vanessa snapped, abandoning her professional facade. "You've been jealous of me your entire life, and now you're trying to sabotage my success out of spite." The room grew uncomfortably quiet as her outburst hung in the air. My father cleared his throat. "Vanessa, these documents seem quite clear. Were you planning to sell company assets without board approval?" "Dad, please," she scoffed. "I'm the CEO. I'm making decisions for the company's benefit while she's off pouting because she finally didn't get her way for once." "That's not an answer," he pressed, his voice hardening. "Were you negotiating with Brighton without board knowledge or approval?" When Vanessa began another deflection, the bank representative interrupted. "I apologize for interjecting, but our concern is with the company's immediate financial stability and leadership. Based on the information presented today, First Regional Bank cannot continue supporting Wilson Construction under current management. We would need to see significant changes before reinstating normal credit operations." This blunt assessment silenced Vanessa momentarily. My father called for a vote of confidence in the current CEO. The results were devastating for Vanessa. 3 votes of no confidence, my parents and me, against her single vote for herself. "This is ridiculous," she exploded, standing so abruptly, her chair toppled backward. "Mom, Dad, you can't seriously be taking her side after everything I've done. Do you know what I gave up to come save this outdated little company? I had offers from actual important firms." My mother flinched at the contempt in her voice. "Vanessa, please," she began, but my sister was already gathering her things. "Fine," she spat. "Keep your precious company. It's probably worthless anyway. I'll be speaking with my own attorneys about this ambush." She stormed out, her hired lawyer trailing awkwardly behind her. The stunned silence that followed was broken by an urgent knock. Carlos entered, his expression grave. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have an emergency situation with the Riverfront Plaza project. The temporary supports for the East Wing need immediate adjustment based on the soil testing results that just came in. If we don't address this within 48 hours, we're looking at potential structural failure that could set the project back months and cost millions." The crisis couldn't have come at a worse time. With Vanessa effectively removed but no clear leadership established, the company faced both an immediate project emergency and a broader existential threat. All eyes turned to me. My father spoke first. "Amanda, no one knows that project like you do. We need your help." I felt a momentary satisfaction at their recognition of my expertise, but it was overshadowed by concern for the employees and clients who would suffer if the project failed. I stood at a crossroads. I could walk away, leaving them to face the consequences of their choices, or I could step in to save the company that had discarded me. For a moment, I considered the first option. After years of underappreciation and the ultimate betrayal, would it not be justified to let them handle their own crisis? But then I thought of Michael, Diana, Carlos, and dozens of other employees who had always treated me with respect and who depended on Wilson Construction for their livelihoods. I thought of the clients who had trusted us with their projects and investments. "I'll handle the riverfront situation," I finally said, "but we need to be clear about my role and authority moving forward. This isn't me coming back to clean up messes while someone else takes credit." My father nodded solemnly. "We understand, Amanda. Things will be different this time. I promise." The Riverfront Plaza crisis became the catalyst for Wilson Construction's rebirth and my own professional redemption. Within hours of the board meeting, I was on site with Carlos and the structural engineering team, reviewing soil testing data and developing an immediate action plan. We worked through the night, calling in specialized equipment and team members who trusted my judgment enough to respond without question. By dawn, temporary reinforcements were in place, and by the following afternoon, we had implemented a permanent solution that not only resolved the immediate danger, but actually improved the overall structural integrity of the design. Roger Billings, the riverfront developer, arrived just as we were finishing. "I heard you were back," he said, surveying our work with approval. "This is why we wanted Wilson Construction in the first place. Because of you, Amanda." His words carried weight beyond the immediate crisis. When I returned to the office after 48 hours of intensive crisis management, I found my parents waiting in the conference room with James Harrington. The atmosphere was subdued, tinged with shame and regret that they tried to mask with business-like efficiency. "We've prepared emergency stabilization measures for company operations," my father began, sliding a folder across the table. "We'd like you to review them and provide input." I opened the folder to find a hastily assembled plan that addressed some immediate concerns but missed critical aspects of the company's needs. Rather than criticizing, I pulled out my laptop and opened my own comprehensive recovery strategy, one I had developed during those first days after my termination, anticipating this very moment. "Here's what we actually need to do," I said, projecting my plan onto the screen. For the next 3 hours, we worked through a detailed approach to stabilize every aspect of the company: client relationships, financial structures, supplier terms, employee retention, and project timelines. My parents listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions but raising no objections. The contrast to our previous interactions was striking. By evening, we had an actionable recovery plan that addressed both immediate crises and long-term stability. I positioned myself as a temporary external consultant rather than rejoining as an employee, a boundary that protected both my autonomy and self-respect. Over the following days, I worked methodically through our most pressing challenges. I personally called each major client to discuss their concerns and projects. I met with First Regional Bank to renegotiate our credit terms based on the new leadership structure. I hosted a company-wide meeting to address the swirling rumors and present a clear path forward. Throughout this process, my parents remained uncharacteristically deferential, following my lead and supporting my decisions without interference. The underlying question of permanent leadership remained unaddressed until the following week, when we scheduled a private family dinner at my parents' home. The atmosphere was tense as my mother served her pot roast. the same meal from that fateful night when they had announced Vanessa's ascension. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. We ate in awkward silence until my father finally set down his fork. "Amanda, we owe you an apology. A profound one." He looked older than I had ever seen him, the weight of recent events etched into his face. We were blind to what was happening. Blind to Vanessa's true nature, and blind to your value. My mother reached across the table for my hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "We've always loved both our daughters, but we failed to see how our actions affected you. We thought Vanessa needed more support because you were always so capable, so self-sufficient." "That's backward thinking," I replied gently but firmly. "You rewarded incompetence and entitlement while punishing reliability and hard work." They both nodded, accepting this truth without defense. "The question now," my father continued, "is what happens to Wilson Construction? It's clear to everyone that you should be leading the company. We're prepared to make that official, with whatever terms you require." I had anticipated this offer and prepared my response carefully. "I'm willing to take leadership of the company, but not under the previous ownership structure. I need to be majority stakeholder, not just CEO serving at the board's pleasure." My father's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't object. I continued. "I propose a restructuring where I receive 51% ownership. You retain 49% collectively, and Vanessa is removed from both ownership and the board." "And if we disagree?" my father asked, more curious than confrontational. "Then I'll continue as a consultant through this crisis, establish my own firm, and take my clients and key staff with me when I leave. Wilson Construction will survive but never thrive again." The starkness of these options hung in the air between us. My mother broke the silence. "What about Vanessa? She's still our daughter." "That's for you to navigate as her parents," I replied. "But she has no place in this company after what she's done. The legal issues of her attempted asset sales without board approval could actually result in criminal charges, though I'm not pushing for that outcome." My father nodded slowly. "We'll need to discuss this privately, but I think your terms are reasonable given everything that's happened." 2 days later, the board convened to vote on the new company structure. My parents had accepted my terms. With one modification, they asked to retain a symbolic 5% for my brother Tyler, who had supported me throughout this ordeal. I agreed willingly. The vote was unanimous, and the paperwork was signed without fanfare. I was now CEO and majority owner of Wilson Construction. Vanessa's reaction was predictably volatile. When informed of the restructuring by our attorneys, she threatened lawsuits and made scandalous allegations about my business practices. However, faced with the evidence of her own misconduct and the potential legal consequences, she eventually accepted a settlement that required her to sign a non-disclosure agreement and relinquish all claims to company assets or positions. The legal proceedings were handled quietly, protecting the company's reputation while ensuring she could not interfere again. With leadership settled, I focused on rebuilding what had been damaged and strengthening what remained intact. We completed the Riverfront Plaza project ahead of the revised schedule, earning both additional fees and renewed trust. Oakwood Commons and the Thompson Municipal Center projects resumed with renewed vigor and improved designs. New clients approached us, having heard about our resilience through industry channels. By the end of the quarter, Wilson Construction was operating at full capacity again, with a stronger financial position and more cohesive team than ever before. Throughout this period of intense work and transformation, I experienced a complex mixture of emotions. The vindication was certainly satisfying, but it came with the sobering knowledge of how deeply my family relationships had been damaged. While my professional success had finally been recognized, the path to that recognition had exposed painful truths about my parents' favoritism and my sister's character. Yet, as we completed our first major project under my official leadership, watching the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the completed Riverfront Plaza with my team around me, I felt something unexpected. Not just pride or vindication, but a genuine sense of having arrived where I was meant to be, on my own terms. 1 year after the tumultuous boardroom showdown that changed everything, I stood on the rooftop terrace of our newest completed project, a sustainable mixed-use development that had already won 2 industry awards for innovation. The skyline view reminded me how far we had come, both literally and figuratively. Wilson Construction had not merely survived, it had transformed into a regional powerhouse with a reputation for excellence, innovation, and integrity. Our annual revenue had increased by 32%. Our workforce had grown to 68 full-time employees plus dozens of trusted contractors. Most importantly, we had established a company culture based on merit, collaboration, and mutual respect. The personal journey had been equally transformative, though considerably more complex. In the months following the restructuring, my parents and I began the difficult work of rebuilding our relationship through weekly therapy sessions with a family counselor. The first sessions were painful, filled with raw emotions and uncomfortable truths. My father struggled to acknowledge the decades of favoritism that had shaped our family dynamics. My mother often dissolved into tears when confronted with the consequences of their choices. Yet gradually, conversation by conversation, we established a new foundation based on honesty rather than denial. "I always thought you were the strong one who didn't need our support," my father admitted during one particularly significant session. "I see now how unfair that was. Punishing you for your capabilities while rewarding Vanessa for her weaknesses." My mother added, "We were so blinded by Vanessa's charm that we couldn't see how she manipulated all of us. You tried to tell us in your way, but we weren't listening." These acknowledgments didn't erase the past, but they created space for something new to grow. Our relationship evolved into one between adults who respected each other, rather than the parent-child dynamic that had constrained us previously. Vanessa remained a complicated subject. She had moved to California after the settlement, ostensibly for a fresh start, but more likely to escape the consequences of her actions. My parents maintained limited contact with her, holiday calls and occasional visits, but the golden child pedestal had been permanently dismantled. I had no contact with her by mutual unspoken agreement. Perhaps someday reconciliation might be possible, but that day remained distant. The professional healing happened more naturally. With clear leadership and direction, Wilson Construction quickly regained its footing and then surpassed its previous success. I implemented structural changes that had been mere ideas during my previous tenure, a profit-sharing program for all employees, a mentorship initiative for promising workers regardless of background or education, and an innovation fund to explore sustainable construction methods. Michael Jenkins, who had supported me through the darkest days, became our operations director. "Never doubted you for a minute, boss," he said gruffly when accepting the promotion. "Some of us always knew who really built this company." Diana Chen, whose courage in sharing critical information had been instrumental to our survival, became Chief Financial Officer. Her meticulous systems and forward-thinking financial strategies helped us weather industry fluctuations with remarkable stability. Carlos Rodriguez, brilliant and loyal, took on the role of Project Innovation Director, leading our efforts to incorporate sustainable practices and cutting-edge technologies into traditional construction approaches. Together, we formed a leadership team bonded by shared values and mutual respect. The mentorship program became particularly meaningful to me, a way to ensure that talented individuals would never be overlooked or undervalued as I had been. We specifically sought out employees who showed potential but might be overshadowed by more outspoken colleagues. "Success isn't always about who speaks loudest," I told our management team. "Sometimes it's about who works hardest when no one's watching." My relationship with my younger brother Tyler also deepened during this period. Though he maintained his career as an architect in Chicago, he became more involved with Wilson Construction, serving as a design consultant on special projects. "I always saw what was happening with you and Vanessa. he confessed during a weekend visit. I was just too young to know what to do about it. I'm sorry I wasn't a better ally. His support now meant more than past actions could have. Perhaps the most profound change was internal. The constant need to prove myself, to earn validation that never came, had been a driving force throughout my career. As I settled into leadership recognized by both achievement and title, that desperate striving gradually transformed into something healthier, ambition rooted in purpose rather than pain. During a quiet moment at our annual company retreat, standing by a lakeside as the sun set, Diana asked if I felt vindicated by everything that had happened. I considered the question carefully before answering. Not vindicated exactly, I replied. More like verified. For years I questioned my own perceptions, wondering if I was imagining the double standards and overlooked contributions. Now I know I wasn't crazy or overly sensitive. What happened was real, and so was my response to it. And your parents? She asked gently. We're finding a new way forward, I said. They'll never be perfect, but they're trying to see me clearly now. That's something I never thought possible. As I reflected on the journey from that devastating day of my firing to the present moment of genuine success, the lesson crystallized with remarkable clarity. True success isn't measured by titles or recognition from others. It's built through integrity, perseverance, and the courage to stand up for your worth when no one else will. The company that fired me had become truly mine, not through manipulation or vindictiveness, but through demonstrating unmistakable value that could no longer be denied. I had turned the tables not by becoming like my sister, but by remaining steadfastly myself. And that made the victory all the sweeter. Have you ever been underestimated by family or coworkers only to prove them wrong in the end? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you handled similar situations and what lessons you learned along the way. Don't forget to like this video if you found inspiration in my journey, subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges, and share with someone who might need to be reminded of their worth today. Remember, sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage. It gives you the space to build something extraordinary while no one's watching. Thank you for joining me on this journey.